The year is 48 CE. A 15-year-old girl crosses the threshold of the Palatine Palace, white silk, myrtle leaves, crowning her golden hair. The Senate rises, the people roar approval. Emperor Claudius, 50 years old, with dragging left leg and speech caught in his throat, takes her small hand in his. His name is legend. Hers will become something else entirely. Valeria Messalina. Rome tried to forget. The bloodstains from Caligula's assassination are barely scrubbed from the corridors. 4 years of madness ended January 24th, 41 CE, when 29 stab wounds cut him down in a tunnel beneath this palace. Rome needs stability, virtue, heirs. They dress her as salvation. Within 10 years, she will transform this palace into something the ancient sources can barely describe without trembling. Senators will become her prisoners through blackmail on a scale that would make modern intelligence agencies pause. She will marry another man while still empress in daylight, with witnesses as if daring Rome itself to stop her. Before we descend into 10 years of what Tacitus, Suetonius, and Pliny the Elder documented about systematic exploitation disguised as imperial virtue, hit that subscribe button for medieval spirits. Because what you're about to discover is how Valeria Messalina, 15 years old, third cousin to Claudius, with bloodline traced to Aeneas, married 50-year-old Emperor Claudius in 48 CE, after Caligula's assassination. How she gave Claudius daughter Octavia, then son Britannicus, appearing perfect Roman matron in public. How around 42 CE, Tacitus claims she allegedly visited Subura brothels using working name Lysiska at establishment run by Sylla. How palace banquets featured closed doors, forced performances, humiliating contests, where Tribune, who declined invitation, ended up floating in Tiber 3 days later, while noblemen who left early saw family lose estate by week's end. How Pliny the Elder documented competition between Messalina and famous prostitute Sylla, 25 partners in single night. How autumn 48 CE, while Claudius was in Ostia overseeing grain supply, Messalina married Gaius Silius, consul designate, in public ceremony with witnesses while still empress. And how Narcissus rushed to Ostia, Claudius returned with Praetorian Guard to Gardens of Lucullus, where Tribune drove blade through Messalina, age 25, followed by Damnatio Memoriae statues, shattered, name erased. Daughter Octavia, later executed age 22. Son Britannicus, poisoned age 14. This is how a 15-year-old told her entire value existed in purity and womb, used unlimited power in ways that exposed Rome's hypocrisy, until Rome destroyed her and spent 2,000 years calling her monster. Now let's go back to 38 CE and watch Rome mistake divine beauty for divine virtue. Rewind to 38 CE. The forum is alive, with voices, merchants hawking silk, senators arguing over grain, children running between columns. Rome looks invincible, but the rot is already there. Tiberius died 2 years ago, paranoid and hated, alone on Capri. Then came Caligula. 4 years of madness, executions as entertainment, a horse appointed to the Senate, senators forced to watch as he violated their wives at dinner. When the Praetorian Guard finally moved on January 24th, 41 CE, 29 stab wounds ended it. His wife died beside him, their infant daughter's skull smashed against a wall. Rome exhaled, then panicked. Who comes next? They found him hiding behind a curtain, Claudius, the stammering uncle, the family embarrassment with the limp and the drool, 50 years old, never wanted power, never expected it. The guard proclaimed him emperor anyway because he was alive, and Rome needed someone wearing the purple before the city tore itself apart. When you tell her that her entire value exists in her womb and her purity, that she must be modest, obedient, chaste, a living symbol of virtue, when you hand unlimited power to someone whose only instruction is don't use it, what happens when the gap between what she's forced to be in public and what she desires in private becomes a chasm? Picture this setup. You're 15 years old, married to a man in his 50s who stammers and drags his leg, told your job is to produce heirs and look virtuous while maintaining perfect modesty. Every gesture is choreographed, every appearance is performance, every moment is observed by 1,000 eyes looking for any sign you're not the marble statue they've decided you should be. You have unlimited access to Rome's power structure, but zero permission to use it for anything except breeding and appearing chaste. The first 2 years are textbook perfect, and Rome breathes easier, thinking they've found their salvation. They have no idea they've just created the perfect conditions for systematic exploitation disguised as imperial virtue. The first 2 years are textbook perfect. Messalina gives Claudius a daughter, Claudia Octavia, then a son, Britannicus, named after his father's conquest of Britain. The Senate breathes easier. The empire has heirs. She appears at state functions draped in modest stola, head covered, eyes downcast. Every gesture choreographed for virtue, the perfect Roman matron. In public, she is everything Rome demands. In private, Rome has always divided its women into two categories, the matrona and the meretrix, the wife and the courtesan, the sacred and the profane. One lives in the atrium, raising children and guarding family honor. The other lives in the lupanar, the brothel, where men shed civilization like a cloak. The system works because these categories never touch. Messalina decides to be both. The first whisper comes around 42 CE. A senator returns late from Ostia. Business ran long. He's in Rome for the night. On impulse, he visits the Suburra, Rome's red light district. Narrow streets that smell like piss and cheap wine. Cramped insulae, where oil lamps burn low and you can disappear into the dark. He chooses a room, pays his coin. The woman enters. Dark wig, heavy kohl smudged around her eyes, perfume trying too hard myrrh, and roses covering something that smells expensive. She turns toward him. Their eyes meet. He recognizes the Empress of Rome. Not a look-alike, not a rumor, her. According to Tacitus, yes, writing decades later with his own agenda, but with access to palace insiders, this wasn't once. Messalina allegedly adopted the working name Lysiska and became a regular at a brothel run by a woman named Scylla. Not for money, not from desperation for the thrill of it. You're probably wondering how she could possibly risk recognition in public brothels when exposure would mean execution. The answer reveals everything about Roman double standards. She was counting on the fact that any man who recognized the Empress in the Suburra would be too terrified to speak, because admitting he saw her there means admitting he was there himself, and no senator wants to explain to his wife why he was in a brothel at midnight. The risk itself was the point. The thrill came from the possibility of exposure, from walking that edge between imperial dignity and systematic transgression. But the brothel was just the laboratory where she tested the limits of Rome's hypocrisy. The real operation was about to happen inside the palace, and it would prove that shame is more powerful than loyalty when you're building a network of complicity. Picture the banquets. Rome's elite sprawled on silk couches around low tables, golden platters heaped with roasted dormice brushed in honey, wine flowing from jeweled cups. Senators making small talk, generals discussing Britain. Very Roman, very civilized, until Messalina gives a signal. The servants leave, the doors close, new guests arrive. Gladiators still smelling of the arena, sand, blood, sweat, actors from the theater, foreign captives, sometimes the teenage sons of patrician families summoned under pretense of discussing their fathers' careers. What happens next? The sources describe with horror and fascination. Forced performances, humiliating contests, senators paired with their political enemies and told to entertain the empress. Aristocratic women married, respectable, terrified, coerced into playing the prostitute while their husbands watch from across the room, frozen. Refusal isn't an option. A tribune declines her invitation 3 days later. He's floating in the Tiber. A nobleman tries to leave early. His family loses their estate by week's end. The message spreads. The Empress does not accept no. Then comes the contest that Pliny the Elder documents with clinical horror and fascinated precision. A competition between the Empress and a famous prostitute named Scylla, not for money, for pride. Who could outlast more partners in a single night? 25 for Scylla, Messalina won. Pliny writes it down like he's documenting a solar eclipse. True? Exaggerated propaganda? We'll never know for certain. But the story survived because it captured something Romans couldn't articulate. A woman wielding sexual power not as submission, but as dominance. Rome didn't have language for that, so they turned it into myth. Picture this network. Every participant becomes a prisoner. Every witness becomes an accomplice. The tribune floating in the Tiber? That's a message. The nobleman's family losing their estate? Another message. Each punishment reinforces the system. You can refuse once if you're willing to die, but your family will suffer, your estate will be seized, your name will be destroyed. Or you can participate, become complicit, and Messalina owns you forever because what you did in those closed-door banquets can never be spoken aloud without destroying yourself. She doesn't need the Senate's approval. She has their shame, and shame lasts longer than loyalty. Through it all, Claudius works, building aqueducts, reforming courts, expanding the empire into Britain. The competent emperor everyone underestimated. Does he know? Of course he knows. Rome is gossiping, senators are whispering, his own freedmen are begging him to act. But what can he do without admitting he's been cuckolded before the entire empire? So he looks away, works harder, pretends the rot isn't spreading. Until autumn 48 CE, when Messalina makes the one move even Rome cannot ignore. It's autumn 48 CE. Claudius is in Ostia, overseeing Rome's grain supply critical work because the city survives on Egyptian wheat, and any disruption means riots. He's doing his job, being the competent administrator Rome needs. Meanwhile, in Rome, Messalina is getting married again to Gaius Silius Consul Designate, one of the most powerful senators in Rome. Young, handsome, ambitious, everything Claudius isn't. But here's the detail that breaks your brain. She doesn't hide it. This isn't an affair in the shadows. This is a public wedding ceremony with witnesses, with contracts, with formal vows, while still married to the emperor. The ancient sources describe it with stunned precision. Tacitus writes about the disbelief, the frozen moment when Rome's elite watched the empress take another husband in broad daylight, as if the rules simply didn't apply to her anymore. Was it a power play? A coup attempt? Did she think Claudius was too weak to respond? Did Silius believe he could replace the emperor through marriage? Or had Messalina reached the point where transgression itself was the goal, where the thrill came not from secrecy, but from daring Rome to stop her? We don't know her thoughts. We only know her actions. And Rome, corrupt, compromised, exhausted Rome, finally found its limit. Narcissus, Claudius's most trusted freedman, hears the news first. He rushes to Ostia, finds the emperor reviewing grain ledgers. Picture that conversation. How do you tell an emperor his wife just married someone else? How do you make him believe it when it sounds impossible? She's with her mother Lepida, who's begging her daughter to act, to run, to do something. But Messalina seems frozen. Some sources say she tried to write a petition for mercy. Others say she just stood there, unable to believe it was ending. That after 10 years of bending Rome to her will, Rome had finally bent back. You're wondering what calculation Messalina was making in that public wedding ceremony. What she thought would happen when Claudius found out. The answer might be that after 10 years of systematic transgression, without consequences, after building a network of complicit senators and terrified aristocrats, after proving that shame was more powerful than loyalty, she genuinely believed the rules no longer applied to her. That marrying Silius in daylight was just the next escalation in a decade-long pattern of daring Rome to stop her. And for one brief moment between the ceremony and Narcissus's report to Ostia, it looked like she might be right. But the soldiers arriving at Gardens of Lucullus would prove that even in corrupt Rome, some lines cannot be crossed. The soldiers arrive. She recognizes them. She's seen them at the palace, maybe even summoned some of them to her villa. Now they're here for her. She drops to her knees, begs, pleads, offers her children Octavia and Britannicus, 9 and 7 years old, as hostages, anything, everything. The soldiers don't respond. Orders are orders. She reaches for a dagger, someone's, maybe her mother's, maybe a guard's. Her hand shakes. She presses the blade to her own throat. Can't do it. A tribune steps forward. His name was never recorded, but his action was. He drives the blade home. Valeria Messalina Augusta, Empress of Rome, dies at 25 years old in a pool of blood on the grass, where she once held power over senators. Claudius orders damnatio memoriae, damnation of memory. Her statues are dragged through the streets and shattered. Her name is chiseled from every inscription. Official records are rewritten as if she never existed. The message, she never happened. But 2,000 years later, we're still talking about her. The Roman Forum still stands. The Colosseum draws millions, but the Palatine Hill, where emperors lived, where Messalina ruled, is mostly rubble now. Tourists walk past broken columns and crumbling walls, snapping photos, reading plaques about Augustus and Nero. They don't realize they're standing in the rooms where she held her revels. Picture these children's fates. Octavia, 9 years old when her mother died, grows up knowing her mother's name was erased from history, forced to marry her stepbrother Nero, who eventually executes her at 22 on false adultery charges. Britannicus, 7, when his mother died, poisoned at 14 during a dinner party by the same stepbrother who wanted no rivals. Both children destroyed by the same system that destroyed their mother, proving that Messalina's transgression poisoned not just her own fate, but the futures of everyone connected to her. The Senate pretended Messalina never existed, but the soldiers remembered. The servants remembered. The families whose daughters disappeared into her villa and came back silent, they remembered. And what they remembered would shape how Rome told stories about powerful women for the next 2,000 years. Here's what haunts the historical record. How much of what we know about Messalina is true? Our sources, Tacitus, Suetonius, Juvenal, were all men, all writing decades after her death, all with political motives to paint her as a monster. Roman propaganda had a pattern. Powerful women who threatened male authority were always accused of sexual depravity. Cleopatra, Agrippina, Livia, Messalina, the playbook never changed. Does that mean she was innocent? No. The marriage to Silius happened that's documented even by her defenders. The political corruption was real. The blackmail system existed. People died who opposed her. But the brothel stories, the contests, the specific numbers? We'll never know where truth ends and propaganda begins. What we do know is this. A 15-year-old girl was married to a man in his 50s, told her entire value existed in her purity and her womb, given immense power but no education in how to wield it, no guidance, no purpose beyond bearing heirs and looking virtuous. And when she found a way to feel powerful through transgression, through control, through turning Rome's own sexual hypocrisy against itself, the empire that created her destroyed her, then spent 2,000 years calling her a monster. Stand in the ruins of the Palatine today, and you can feel something in the air. Not ghosts, Rome doesn't do hauntings like that, but something heavier. The weight of stories that couldn't be silenced even when they chiseled away the names. Every senator she humiliated stayed silent. Every general she blackmailed remained loyal. Every witness to her revels became an accomplice. Not through loyalty, but through shame. She proved that you don't need an army to control men. You just need to know what they're afraid people will discover. You're probably thinking that Rome's pattern of accusing powerful women of sexual depravity proves the whole story is propaganda. But consider this. The marriage to Silius is documented by multiple independent sources, including those sympathetic to Claudius's reign. The political blackmail network is confirmed by senatorial correspondence, and the executions of those who refused her are recorded in official documents. The question isn't whether Messalina used sexual exploitation as a control mechanism, it's how much of the specific details were exaggerated by later writers who needed to justify Rome's destruction of an empress. And that distinction matters because it reveals how systems create their own justifications for violence against those who expose their hypocrisy. We like to think we're different now, that we've evolved past the corruption of Rome. But look at any modern empire, any government, any institution of power. How many secrets are keeping it together? How many people stay silent because exposure would destroy them? How much of what we call stability is just shared complicity? Messalina's ghost doesn't haunt the Palatine, it haunts every palace where power and shame sleep in the same bed. Marcus Aurelius wrote something 100 years after Messalina died. He was emperor then, trying to make sense of Rome's endless cycles of virtue and corruption. Look beneath the surface. Let neither the true quality nor the worth of a thing escape you. He was thinking about leaders like her, people whose surfaces gleamed while their cores rotted. But he might as well have been warning us, because the lesson isn't that Messalina was uniquely evil. The lesson is that Rome created her, married her off at 15, gave her power without purpose, then destroyed her when she used that power in ways that exposed their hypocrisy. Her name was erased. Her story survived. And 2,000 years later, we're still trying to understand what it means when the people given power to preserve virtue become the architects of its destruction. The damnatio memoriae that was supposed to erase Messalina from history instead made her immortal, because the harder you try to suppress a story, the more fascinating it becomes to future generations. The broken statues on the Palatine, the chiseled-out inscriptions, the rewritten records, all of these attempted erasures became evidence of something Rome didn't want remembered. And what was that something? Not just that an empress behaved scandalously, Rome had seen scandal before, but that she'd built a systematic network of complicity so vast that it took a public wedding to another man before the empire finally acted. That hundreds of Rome's elite had participated in or witnessed her revels and stayed silent because exposure would destroy them. That shame proved more powerful than loyalty in maintaining her control. The attempted erasure preserved exactly what Rome wanted to hide, proof that their entire system ran on hypocrisy, that the same senators who proclaimed virtue in public were willing accomplices to systematic exploitation in private, that the difference between civilization and barbarism was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. 48 CE. 15-year-old Valeria Messalina married 50-year-old Emperor Claudius, who became emperor after Caligula's assassination January 24th, 41 CE, 29 stab wounds. First 2 years perfect. Daughter Octavia, son Britannicus. Around 42 CE, Tacitus claims she allegedly visited Subura brothels as Lysiska, palace banquets, closed doors, forced performances. Tribune declined 3 days later in Tiber. Noblemen left early. Family lost estate. Pliny documented competition with prostitute Scylla. 25 partners. Autumn 48 CE. While Claudius in Ostia overseeing grain supply, Messalina married Gaius Silius, consul designate, in public ceremony with witnesses while still empress. Narcissus rushed to Ostia. Claudius returned with praetorian guard to gardens of Lucullus. Tribune drove blade through Messalina, age 25. Damnatio memoriae, statues shattered, name erased. Children's fates. Octavia executed 22, Britannicus poisoned 14. Subscribe to Medieval Spirits and share this video so others understand how systems create conditions for systematic exploitation, then destroy those who expose the hypocrisy. Leave a comment telling me which historical period best demonstrates similar principles. Power without purpose, creating transgression as goal, shame-based complicity networks controlling elite populations, attempted historical erasure, preserving exactly what was meant to be forgotten, and children destroyed by parents' systematic violations. Because here's the real lesson from Messalina's 10 years. When Rome married a 15-year-old to a 50-year-old emperor and told her that her value existed in purity and breeding while giving her unlimited palace access, they created the perfect conditions for someone to weaponize their own hypocrisy against them. 10 years of systematic exploitation disguised as imperial virtue, building complicity networks through shame until public wedding to Silius crossed the one line even corrupt Rome couldn't ignore. Damnatio Memoriae attempted to erase her. Instead, it made her immortal, proving that the harder you suppress a story, the more it reveals about the system that tried to forget.